Hello, this is Amin, and this is session 44 of ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. This tutorial series contains .NET 5 and .NET 6 code, and that's why you can use this tutorial if you are going to learn .NET 5 or .NET 6. In this session, we are going to talk about creating form with tag helpers and also validating the form and the model with tag helpers. If you have watched the previous session of this tutorial series, you can find how we created form with HTML helper, and also we discussed about validation form, and we introduced several data annotation. In this session, we are going to create a form with tag helpers and also validating the form and displaying the error message of validation with tag helpers. First, for creating form with tag helpers, we will use some of the tag helpers that I introduced here: asp-controller, asp-action, asp-for, asp-items. And in this session, we are going to create a new model, and we are going to create controller and view for that action method. For this purpose, first we create a model which we call it category, and it has 4 properties: ID, category name, description, and active property. Also, active property has 2 options, yes or no, which we will create a enum class for that one, and we will show you how you can use that enum inside your form. Then we create a controller for this purpose. We call it CategoryController, and then we create an action method which will be create, and then when we are going to that route, we will see the form that you can see here. Also, we create a view for collecting the data for creating a category, as you can see with tag helpers, asp-for and asp-items, and we use asp-controller and asp-action for the form. Also, later we decorate the input and labels with Bootstrap classes to make the form more stylish, and we use Bootstrap classes later in this video. And I will share the codes in my website and also in my GitHub. Let's flip to Visual Studio and implement the form with tag helpers, and later we are going to validate the model and the form. This is the project that we have been working so far throughout this tutorial. First step, I create a model, and I will call it category. Let's go to models and add a new class, and I call it category, and I will add it. Here I will add my required properties, and for interest of time, I copy the code which is related to category. And also I will have another property which I need to create a enum class for that one, which would be active, and I want to make a category active or inactive when I want to submit the data of a payment. That's why I first create a class for this purpose. Here inside model, I add another class. I will call it category active options. And here I change class to enum. And then here I add the options that I want to have as an option of active. I save it and I return to category and add another property which its type should be category active options, and the property name is active. Let me save these changes, and next step I will create a controller for category CRUD operation, and I will talk about CRUD operation later in this video series. I'm going to controller and create one controller. I select MVC controller empty, and I will call it category controller. Let's add the controller, and here I have one built-in action method, and I change it to create. And this action method will be launched when I go to category create row. And next step, I should add the view. For this purpose, I can right click on the view and add the view. Select razor view empty, and I will add it. And here I should call it create, and then add the view. And as you can see, automatically inside the view, a subfolder added which is category, and inside that one I have create a view. And this view should be bound with the category model. That's why I use model and I bind it to category. Also, for the title of the view, I need to add one view back, and I change the title of view back to create new category. Then I need to add the forms. For this purpose, I use HTML form tag. Then I should bind this form to one controller and action method. I can perform this task with asp-controller and asp-action. Now I use asp-controller and use category as a controller, and also asp-action, which would be create. Also, I should mention which method I want to use for submitting this data. That's why I use method, and its method should be post. And inside the form, I should add the required label and input and select for being displayed in the form and for collecting the data that I need for creating a category. That's why I use label HTML tag. And here with asp-for, I can bind this label to the property of the model that I want. The first option would be category name. And then I add one input for collecting the data, and again I use asp-for to bind this input to one of the property that I want to collect the respective data. And here is category name. I copy this code and repeat it for description as well, and just I change here description. Also, I need a select and a drop-down list to display the option of the active. That's why I add the label first, and with asp-for I bind it to active, and then I use select HTML helper for creating drop-down list for active property, and I bind it to the respective property, which would be active. And for displaying the enum value inside this select and this inside this drop-down list, I can use asp-items. And asp-items, I can use a HTML helper for receiving the data from the enum class that I created earlier. That's why I use HTML and get enum selected list. And here I should tell the method which enum list I need to be cached here. I use category active options. And as it is method, I should use open and close parentheses. Also, I need a button to submit this data. I label the button as a create, and also the type of button should be submit. Let's save these changes and run the project to see what we have until this step. Project is up and running, and I go to category create, and you can see I have my items and I have my drop down list, and with the option of the ENA, and also I have the create button, but the style of form is not in the proper style, and I can add some bootstrap classes to have the form in the better shape. Also, I can add one item here for reaching to this action method. Let's back to Visual Studio and add the required bootstrap classes to this form, and also adding one menu and submenu for category and for the create category action method. In the interest of time, I copy and paste the code which include the bootstrap classes. The codes are the same as the code that I entered earlier, just I add some bootstrap classes and wrap each label and input of each category inside the div element. Also, I'm going to the layout file and add the menu and submenu that I want. Here inside the main layout file, you can see I have the navbar element and navbar that I have, and I want to add one item and sub-item to this menu. In the interest of time, I just copy and paste the code here, and I use the tag helpers that I described earlier, and also I have one main item which would be category, and it has one submenu which is create category, which reach us to the category and create action method. The codes are available in the website and also in my GitHub account for your review. Let me save the changes and refresh the page to see the changes that I have implemented. I refresh the page, and you can see I have the menu category and also submenu create category, and it's reached me to this area. And you can see I have category display and active with better display view, but I missed the display input box. Let's back to Visual Studio and add the description property there. I'm going to create, and you can see when I copy and paste the code, I missed this input box. I copy it from here and paste it here, and just in asp-for bind this this input to description property. Let me save it and refresh the page once more. And you can see I have my form with better display view, but I want to add data validation to this form. For this purpose, let's see what we should do. First step, I should add some data annotation to my model, which is category model, and then I should add asp-validation-for to the view to display the error message, and also I can use asp-validation-summery for displaying all the validation error. Also, I need to add one more action method, create action method, and I should decorate the second create action method with HTTP post, and with model state that is valid, I can check whether the form and model is valid or not. Let's flip to Visual Studio and implement the changes that I need. First, here I can use asp-validation-for each property. I can add it in a span and use asp-validation-for, and with the binding I can bind this validation to the category. Also, I use one bootstrap class to make this error with the red line. I can use text danger bootstrap class for this purpose. Let me copy this line and paste it for two more property that I have here, and then I bind them to the respective property that I want. Let's save these changes. And then I should go to category and add the required data annotation that I want. For example, I want to make category name as a mandatory field. That's why I add required data annotation. The namespace is not available here. I can add the namespace with pressing Control period button, and I use this data annotation, a namespace, which is inside system.componentModel.data annotation. Also, I want to change the display name of this property with display data annotation, and its name should be category name with one space. Also, I want to use two new data annotation for validation. Earlier, I discussed about string length, but this time I want to add the maximum and minimum allowed character for category name. That's why I use max length and assign 50 character as the maximum length of category name, and the other data annotation would be min length, and I add 3 characters as a minimum length of category name. And also for description, I want to avoid the user to use some special character. That's why I use regular expression. I discussed about regular expression in session 40, and if you haven't watched that session, you can review regular expression data annotation in session 40. And also I want to make active property as a mandatory field. The required data annotation has been added to the model. Let me save the changes. And the last step, I should modify the controller, and I should add one more create action method with HTTP post verb. And here I can decorate it with HTTP post. And also the data that I will receive here would be an object of type of category, as the model is bound to a category. That's why I should receive a object of category here. As its namespace is not available, I should add the namespace here, and I call it category. As I mentioned earlier, with model state that is valid, I can check whether model and form is valid or not. I can use if expression, and I can check whether model state is valid or not. If model state is valid, the bunch of code inside this if block would be launched. Otherwise, the view will be launched again, and the validation error message will be displayed. Let's save the changes, and we'll check whether the validation of form would be working or not. Let me make a breakpoint here to see what I have when I submit the form. And here I refresh the page again. As a first step, I submit the form with some error, same as a special character inside this one, or a category with less than 3 characters, and I submit the form. As you can see, I have the validation error message here. The category field name must be less than 5 characters, and also here I have some special characters. And if whether I delete this one and I submit the form, I receive another data validation, and I'm not able to enter more than 50 characters in category name. And let me run the project in debugging mode to see the submitted data and what I have. For this purpose, I back to Visual Studio and run the project in debugging mode. Project is up and running, and I go to category create action method, and here, for example, I submit this form with this invalid character, and as long as I submit the form, you can see I have an object of category with the data that I have. And also here the model state is invalid and it's returned false. That's why I pass this block of code, and again I see the view with the validation error that I have. And also I can have the summary of this validation error with another tag helper. Let's back to Visual Studio and add the summary of the data validation error there. For this purpose, I can go to create view again and add a div element, and inside the div element I can use asp-validation-summery, and it can be just for model, or it can display nothing, or I can ask it to display all the validation error that I have in the form. And also I can use again the text danger class of Bootstrap to see the error message with the color of red. Let me save these changes and run the project again and go to category create action method and submit the form with the invalid state. And you can see I have the summary of the error message here. And as long as I entered some correct data, you can see the data validation error message of the specific property, and also from the summary will be disappear. In this session, we create a form with tag helpers, and also later in this session, we discuss about data validation and displaying the error message with tag helper. Thank you for watching this session. Don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel and also commenting us for improving this video series tutorial. Also, you can find our updates in our social media channels. Once more, thank you for being with us.